is Lars Edegran. That's not how you pronounce it in Sweden, but that's how we pronounce it.
How do you pronounce it in Sweden?
Edegran.
What instruments do you play?
I started out on piano, and later on I learned to play guitar, banjo, mandolin, and also I played some wind instruments, played clarinet at one point. Mm-hmm. That's basically instruments.
So you were born in Sweden. Were there musicians in your family?
Yes, my father played music. He was not a professional musician. He was a postmaster. And he was also a sportsman, which is, I am not at all. I'm as far from that as you can get. But he was a champion speed skating of Sweden, which is, I can't even stand on the skates. But anyway, that was his thing. But he played guitar and banjo. So, and my brother played also. I had an older brother, 5 years older than me, who played piano. And so I was exposed to music as a kid. And my father sent the siblings for piano lessons, all three of us, my brother and my sister and I. But
How old were you at that point?
About 7. Mm-hmm. And I did that for maybe 3 years or so. I didn't like it.
What was the teacher like?
Very strict German lady. Didn't like you to play anything but classical music, of course. And I wasn't really into that. My brother was already playing in a jazz band, and that's what I wanted to do. They used to rehearse at our house, so I got exposed to that early.
Did you have a piano in the house?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it start? Did you just realize that you could play what you heard?
Yeah, pretty much that. Watching my brother play. He had no lessons. He just learned to play by ear. Mm-hmm. So I basically learned from that. And watching my father play the banjo and the guitar, I basically learned. So I did have piano lessons enough that I could read music somewhat. Not particularly well, but I could read music. And then I taught myself the other instruments from the piano. I didn't take any lessons on guitars or banjos or the clarinet. I was self-taught on those.
There are similarities between guitar and piano, but with wind instruments, did you find it hard to transfer your brain in that way, to think about that pattern?
Yeah, the clarinet is a very difficult instrument, and I never got very good at it. And I didn't really play it in Sweden. I actually played it here in New Orleans when I came here, because I wanted to play in the brass bands. So I picked up a clarinet here, and I actually taught myself to play the clarinet here. And I did that when I came here in 1965. I used to go sit in with the brass bands. And eventually I became a member of one of the brass bands here, the Young Tuxedo Brass Band, which was at that time led by Andrew Morgan, saxophone player. So I became a member of that band. I have a picture of that too here.
We'll look at it.
Yeah.
Backing up, when you were a teenager, what music were you listening to in Sweden? What songs did you love? What musicians did you love?
Well, our father had all 78 records, Fats Waller, Louis Armstrong, and things like that. So I heard that. And then I have some friends in the neighborhood that also were into blues. So I listened to a lot of that too. I got into that too.
And what was it about blues that you gravitated to?
Oh, I don't know. I liked it. I liked the blues because the blues was more different from Swedish music than jazz. It was jazz can sort of Western type of music you can say, but blues is a very American, completely American, and there's nothing like it in European music. So I think because it was so different, I was interested in that.
We'll pick up this question later, but just starting with it, how would you describe the relationship between European interest in American music? I mean, it goes back a long way. There's a huge interest in jazz that started very early.
Yeah, it goes way back. It goes way back to even the 1920s or even earlier. Groups came to Sweden, actually, way back. And recently I found out that there was also gospel groups that came to Sweden even before that, before the 1920s. They toured in Sweden. So there's been an interest in that music in Europe for a long time. I would say not so much in the Scandinavian countries as in England. England had more exposure because of the language. Also, more artists will come to England and France than they would to Sweden. But some of them came to Sweden. Like Sidney Bechet came to Sweden very early. And Louis Armstrong came to Sweden and Denmark in the 1930s already. So there was a lot of exposure.
What's the first time you heard about New Orleans as a place? Do you remember?
Well, from reading books and listening to New Orleans records, really. That's how I was exposed to it. And seeing some movies like the New Orleans movie with Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday. Yeah.
And then you were about 20 when you were traveling around. We were talking about, tell me about that.
Oh yes, well, I was a little younger than that when I first started traveling around in Europe. I went to England, and I went to the southern part of Europe, France and Spain, hitchhiking around. That was around 1963.
Were you playing too? You were busking?
Yeah, we did that too. I had some friends with me. We were out in the street playing.
And you did that for how long?
Oh, that's just for one summer. Yeah. Then I went back to Sweden. And that's, after I had met Bob Kester from Chicago and at the concert with Sleepy John Estes. And I told him that I was interested in coming to America. And he offered me a job in Chicago at his store, which was called Jazz Record Mart. It's still there, actually just closed down a couple of days ago. So I went back to Sweden and I went to the American embassy to find out how can I get to America. And it was very different in those days than it is today to immigrate. And all I needed actually was a letter from Bob saying that he was going to employ me and he would be responsible for me. And then I got a visa to come to Chicago. I went to Chicago. I flew to New York and took a Greyhound bus to Chicago. I was in March 1965. I remember it really well because it was a big snowstorm when I arrived in Chicago, and I was amazed it was colder than Sweden. Although it's further south in Stockholm. Yeah, it was very cold when I arrived there. And I walked up to the store, and Bob wasn't there, and there was a big heavy-set black guy sitting at the minding the store. And it turned out to be Big Joe Williams, who I knew about from recordings. So that was the first person I met in America. It was really amazing. And then I worked for Bob there, packing records and working in his record store. And I was 19 then. So I wasn't able to go, no, I was 20, but you had to be 21 in Chicago at that time to go to a nightclub. So I wasn't able to go to any of the jazz places, like on Rush Street. They had lots of jazz bands playing there. Even had some guys from New Orleans playing up there, who I met in the store. Manuel Sales was there, and Freddie Coleman was playing there. But I couldn't go listen to them. That was kind of disappointing. So I ended up going instead to all the blues clubs on the south side and the west side.
And you saw some very famous
I saw
people.
Some great music. Yeah, I used to spend a lot of time. But Howlin' Wolf had his own club, and I used to go listen to Buddy Guy, who was playing in a little dive, just 2-3 guys, and J.B. Hutto, Sunderland Slim. I heard lots of people. Son House, I heard Son House there, Lightning Hopkins. Well, that was music that I like also, so that was a fantastic experience. So I heard all those guys. And then I decided, well, I got to make a trip down to New Orleans. That was in August, I believe. It was August 1965. And I hitchhiked down to New Orleans.
Hitchhiked?
Yeah, that was kind of brave. I had hitchhiked around Europe. I thought it would be similar, but it wasn't.
Was it?
No, it was much harder.
Why?
Much
What
more
happened?
Well, it was very difficult to get a ride, really. Yeah, it took me a long time to get out of Chicago. But once I got to Memphis, I got a ride all the way to New Orleans in a truck. So I made it here. And that was just before Hurricane Betsy hit. I'd only been here a couple of weeks, I think, when it hit. I was staying in the French Quarter, which wasn't affected that much, but it was lots of damage to the city. And I ended up actually doing labor kind of work then, you know, because I actually didn't know anybody in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. So I was working.
So you came here and did what?
I worked on roofs.
You've arrived.
Yeah, I did a bunch of odd jobs like that, cleaning the streets, and you know, the hurricane work. Really, I did that for a while until I met some musicians here and got a chance to start playing. First, playing in brass bands. That was my first jobs.
Tell me about Andrew Morgan.
Yeah, I met Andrew Morgan. I don't remember how I met him, but I ended up playing clarinet in his band, and we used to play. He lived across the river, and he used to play a lot of funerals, mostly across the river. So I was in his band for maybe a year or so, and this is before I started getting jobs playing piano. And actually, I got to tell you what happened the first day I was in New Orleans.
Please do.
The first day in New Orleans, I came here to Preservation Hall in the daytime. I was standing outside and I heard there was music going on. And Alan Jaffe was standing around there, and he saw me peeping in, and he started talking to me. And I told him, you know, my background, I just come from Europe, and I play a little piano. And he said, well, you can come in if you want. So he let me in. They were having a rehearsal, actually, for a recording session. I remember it was Jim Robinson was there, and Cy Frazier. I don't remember the whole band. And he even let me play a song with the band. I thought that was amazing, because that was
your first day.
Yeah, so amazingly welcome.
What song was it?
Oh, I don't remember.
On the piano.
Yeah, on the piano. Yeah, that was so different from Chicago, which is a very tough town and not very welcoming to people. Very rough town. New Orleans was such a friendly place. I realized as soon as I got here. So, and I met a lot of other people that were hanging around the jazz scene at the time. And I managed to, somebody helped me find an apartment and all that. So everything went really well. So I called up Bob and I quit my job in Chicago, decided to stay here.
What did he say?
Oh, he didn't really care. Mm-hmm. He had lots of people come in who wanted to work in his store. And it was like a mecca for the blues. So a lot of people from Europe was working there actually at the same time as I was there. Mm-hmm. So a couple of guys from England was there. Yeah, no, so that was fine.
Who are some of the teachers who have done most for you, either knowing them or not knowing them, through recordings, through seeing them play, people who've actually taught you?
I did not have any sort of teachers in New Orleans, although I hang out with a lot of different musicians that became friends, and we played jam sessions together. I used to hang out with a guy called Toots Washington. You heard of him? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was a very good friend of mine, and I used to hang out at his house, and he used to play a lot on the piano. I would be watching him, you know, learn some of his licks. He was a very good friend. And the other one was the guy, they call him Little Dad, Frank Molière. He used to play here. Mm-hmm. He also played on Bourbon Street. He actually gave me some lessons. It wasn't much, you know, he just showed me how to make some chords and things like that. Otherwise, I was just watching people play.
What about recordings, though? Listening to recordings, who influenced your style, the development of your style?
Well, I did that already in Sweden.
Sure, but going back to that point,
yeah,
who would have been influential to you?
Well, I listened to the bands that played here at Preservation Hall, actually. You know, Jeanette Kimball, who played here, Sing Miller, Sweet Emma, who I even had a chance to play with after she was, you know, she was paralyzed in one hand, and they would hire somebody else to play the bottom part of the piano. And I ended up doing that a few times. It was an interesting experience.
What was she like?
Oh yeah, and a lot of the other piano players didn't want to be part of the two people playing the piano with her, because she could be quite salty, you know, tell people off or whatever. I remember Sing Miller didn't enjoy it, but she was very nice to me. She liked, you know, young boys. Obviously, she had fun with that. So yeah, she was very friendly to me. It was fun.
So you made your first recording within a year of you being in New Orleans.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Tell us about how all that transpired.
Yeah, that was came about from a guy from North Carolina who used to come down here and make recordings. His name was Leonard Brackett. He had a record company, a small record company, and I got to know him. He used to come here several times a year and hang out in the bars here and hang out at Reservation Hall and at Buster's. And he wanted to do some recordings, and he kind of needed somebody to help him to pick out songs and ideas for the recordings. So I got involved with him, and I did several recordings for him. My first one was with George Lewis, actually. That was the only chance I had to record with him, because he passed on a few years later. It was George Lewis, Jim Robinson, Chester Sardis, bass player, who just moved back to New Orleans around the same time as I came here, and Alec Bigard, the Bon Bigard's brother, who played with Louis Armstrong. And that was the first recording I made. It was made right here at Reservation Hall. And that was in 1966, I believe. Yeah, only been here about a year.
So how often were you playing? How often were you gigging at that point?
Not that much.
And where were you playing?
Variety of places. My first steady job actually wasn't until the late 60s, not the 68, I think it was. I ended up with before then I was just doing spot jobs with various bands around town, wherever I could find. But in 1968, I got a job playing at Lutch's Dance Hall, which was down on Charter Street, right across from Elysian Fields. The building is still there. It's an old concrete building. Are you familiar with it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was just there the other day. It's something else now.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it a studio now?
It's Marinee Recording Studios.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, we played there 1968, 1960. I played there 2 years. Somehow I met the owner there. I don't think I went, I maybe went there to hear a band or something, and I met the owner, and he decided wasn't happy with the band, he wanted to get rid of the band. He asked me if I could put the band together. So I got in sort of an international band together. I had, it was 2 Swedes, me and Orange Kelling playing clarinet, and 2 Japanese, Yoshio and Keiko Toyama, who was living here at the time. He played trumpet and she played the banjo. And then I had 2 American musicians, 2 old guys, Joe Margiotta, the Italian names that were common here in jazz musicians, and Tony Schreiner, who played drums. And we played that for around 2 years, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, for dancing, for really old people mostly. Mm-hmm. And that was a great experience, because we learned a lot of songs playing that, because every song was a request. So we had to bring a lot of music books there to be able to play all the requests. We had to play Italian songs and Spanish songs, tangos, rumbas, lots of waltzes. That was a great experience. I learned a lot of music.
When jazz today is so separated, you know, it's staged, mm-hmm. generally speaking, in front of an audience, what does it mean that people still dance to jazz here, that it's still a living tradition? Yeah, well, that kind of died out. Mm-hmm. I think in the late 60s, Lutch's was one of the last dance halls here. And that was there were several other dance halls going at that time, which I went and visited. And I heard people play in other places. I think the Harmony Inn was one of them. Melody Inn was another one. There was a few other places, but they all died out in the late 60s. I think they died out mostly because of the civil rights laws, because those were segregated places. Lutch's was a segregated place.
they managed to hang on there for a while. I don't know whether they managed to hang on by being a private club or not. I don't know. I don't know what they did. But I think that's what knocked out those clubs, probably. Had something to do with it.
Have issues of race ever affected you as a New Orleans musician?
No, not really. Not really. I played with both, with the black bands and the white bands. And one of the first bands that I became a regular member of was Jabbar Smith, who was a famous trumpet player in New Orleans, white trumpet player. And I was playing at another dance hall uptown called Monsters with Tony Futurat, a trumpet player. I was playing guitar because there was no piano there. So I went and bought a guitar in a pawn shop here. And I learned to play the guitar better than I could before. And so I was playing up there, and one night, that was a non-union job, by the way, and so was Lutchens, because I had joined the union before that. In fact, Alan Jaffe put us in the union, me and several other guys, because we took part in a television show here at the Preservation Hall, and we had to be union members. So Alan Jaffe got us into the union.
Musicians' unions were a big deal at that time.
Yeah, actually I joined the black union. At that time they had two different unions at the time. Since I was playing mostly with those musicians, I joined that union. And then in 1968, when I started playing at Lutchen, I had to resign from the union because it was a non-union place, which was, that was possible. You could just resign for a couple of years and then go right back in again, which is what I did. When I was playing up at Monsters, it was a non-union. And in those days, it was kind of strict. Like, if you're a union guy, you don't play with non-union guys. You get a fine if you do it. So, but one of the friends of Tony Futurat was Harry Shields, a clarinet player, who later played here at Preservation Hall. He came in one night and sat in, which you're not supposed to do, but he did anyway. And he heard me play the guitar. And he said that Jabbar Smith was looking for a guitar player. And I told him I also play the piano. Well, he's looking for somebody who can play both, if possible, So I ended up getting a job with Jabbar Smith in his last band before he retired. And so that was one of my first regular jobs. That was around the same time when I was at Lutchens. Mm-hmm. So I was doing jobs with him. So that was a white band. And then I played in the black brass band. So I was playing both on both ones. And you mentioned race. And I never really experienced any problem with race. But it was interesting to hear the old white musicians talk, because they did use some kind of bad language about black people. And they didn't know that I was playing in black bands too. So they kind of spoke freely around me sometimes. You heard some stupid thing from them sometimes. But I never heard it from the black musicians.
You lived in the quarter for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
How has the quarter changed over time? What was it like then?
Well, it was much more residential, of course. And they have more little shops, hardware stores, drug stores and grocery stores, all kinds of little stores. And we used to go hang out here at Johnny White's bar, which had sort of a local clientele at the time, which is not anymore. And still it was very different. I moved around a lot in the quarter. I lived in many different locations. And also I lived down in the former Marigny. By the time I was playing at Lutchen, I actually lived on Charter Street, right off Esplanade, down there. It's very cheap rent, $60 a month.
$60 a month?
Yeah.
Oh. Tell us some of your memories about the people that you remember best from Preservation Hall. We talked about Sweet Emma.
Yeah.
What other people? On your early recordings, Kid Chic, you've played with many, many people.
Yeah, I recorded with a lot of those people. And I used to sit in here. Josh Lewis always used to ask me to sit in. And he liked you to play piano like a banjo. I remember him. He had very.
How so?
Well, I think he kind of missed the banjo, because he relied a lot on Lawrence Marrero, his banjo player, who played a very strong 4/4 beat. And a lot of piano players didn't play like that. They played, you know, a more looser style. And he didn't like that. And I remember, unfortunately, I didn't get to hear this piano player, Joe Robichaud, because he died right before I came here. But George Lewis had kind of trained him to play like a banjo. I noticed on the recording that he played strict 4/4 piano. And that's what George Lewis liked. So he asked me to play like that. So I will play like that for him. And he really liked that. You know?
Who else do you remember?
Well, I got to be very good friends with Earl Humphrey, the trombone player, the brother of Percy and Willie Humphrey, who had moved back here sometime around that time, 1966 possibly, and we played together quite a bit. He was a real nice guy. He's on some of my recordings. And of course Andrew Morgan. They used to come and jam at my house when I lived down there in Fort Marigny. Yeah, we had jam sessions over there. That was a lot of fun. I got to be very good friends with Harold Deschamps and Kid Chic, who always used to hang out at Buster's a lot. And they would always tell me when there was a party going on or a parade. Often there were parties in the Tremere, friends of Kid Chic, and there will be jam sessions there. So yeah, they were very good, nice people.
What about Dee Dee Pierce?
Yes, I knew Bill and Dee Dee Pierce too, and I visited them at their house too. And I made several recordings with Dee Dee Pierce. So, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to play...
Why don't you play that Pennies from Heaven, because you got a real nice vocal on there, I think.
Okay. Track 3.
That's it, coming up now.
Okay.
Is that a new turntable?
Yeah, we just got it out because the old one didn't work.
That has Earl Humphrey on it too. And this is Orange Kevin's first recording in New Orleans too. He just arrived. He came here a year after me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another version of that recording, right?
Yeah, I think that's the same recording. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same recording.
Yeah. That's Joseph Butler. He was the bass player with Keith Thomas' band. We particularly liked his singing, so we had
It's lovely.
Yeah. He was quite a character.
Is he on the cover?
Well, you can barely see him. Yeah. I think there's a picture of him on the back, but it's not a very good quality picture. I have a painting of him in my house now.
Who did it?
Rockmore. Rockmore. It's the only Rockmore painting I have is of Joseph Butler. It's a great painting. I bought it from Sacha Borenstein. Really nice.
So this was all recorded in the front room? This was all recorded here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think Bill Russell was the recording engineer. Yeah, you can see him there. That's Bill Russell.
When did you first meet Bill Russell?
I met him here at Preservation Hall when I first came here. I think he was here then already, 65. He used to hang out here. He lived next door here for a while. Then he moved over to Jaffa's building on Orleans Street. But he used to hang out here at the hall, sell records, sweep the floor, or whatever he felt like doing. You know.
Yeah, I want to talk about curation of jazz in a minute too.
Yeah.
In the Hogan Jazz Archive.
Right. Yeah, he was no longer working at the archive. Dick Allen was the new curator then. But he was doing a lot of research at home. Bill had a lot of interviews that he was working on because he was writing this book about Joe Morton. And I used to help him with that. I used to go to his apartment and help him transcribe things and stuff like that.
Pennies from Heaven. What are some of your other favorite songs in the repertoire? Your all-time favorite?
Oh, with this, you mean?
Any songs? Yeah.
No, well, I guess
Pennies from Heaven is beautiful.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of songs we were playing in the dance halls. Yeah. In fact, Leonard Brackett, who had this label, he wanted to record songs from the dance halls. So we did quite a few of those. Like on my first record with Just Rose, we recorded Beer Barrel Polka. And that's the kind of music that Bill and Dee Pierce played when they played in the dance hall. So they had that repertoire down. They knew all the songs.
Did you see through, through the late 60s into the 70s and here, what changes in the music were happening?
Well, I think
through those first decades.
In the 60s, well, I think there was some change in the music playing at Preservation Hall, probably with the bands that used to play for dances before, like Keith Thomas Band. Keith Thomas and Bill and Dee Pierce, they used to play for dancing for their entire career, pretty much, I think. At some point, Bill and Dee Pierce played on Decatur Street for sailors. But they spent a lot of their life in dance halls. So they used to play a lot of those songs. But by playing for this type of audience, like at Preservation Hall, they're not dancing, you know. So you weed out waltzes and all those songs go away from your repertoire, pretty much.
And then it becomes more about performance.
It becomes more of a concert performance, and you play more jazz standards than pop songs. Pop songs kind of slip away. They don't play those songs anymore. Like on our first record I did with Dee Pierce, he played Cecilia, he played Beer Barrel Polka, Tie Me to Your Apron Strings Again. Those are songs I've forgotten now. Nobody plays those songs anymore. You know, they gradually went away.
What about your compositional style?
What's that?
What about your compositional style?
I'm not a composer, I'm just an arranger, really. That's all I've done.
Well, you arranging is part of composition.
Oh,
certainly.
you can say that, I guess. Yeah, because you have to write, you have to make up some parts. Yeah. Yeah, that's part of orchestration work. You can say that, yeah. But I never sat down to write a song, actually. That's what I meant, yeah. But that's pretty much self-taught. Well, I did because by the late 60s I started the New Orleans Ragtime Orchestra. That was with Bill Russell. And I kind of got the idea a little bit from Bill Russell, hanging out at his apartment and looking at old sheet music, because he had a lot of ragtime music there. And we talked about ragtime. And I had heard some groups, New Orleans groups that recorded ragtime before. Like Bunk Johnson did some in the 1940s. And Mutt Carey did some also in the 40s. And then there was in New Orleans the Love Giles Ragtime Orchestra, which recorded for Riverside in the 60s. And they played ragtime, and they were reading the whole parts. And they had a violin in the group as well. And Peter Volkers played, and Paul Barnes, a lot of the guys that played here at the hall. And that was sort of the end of the ragtime. This is before the Sting, you know, which brought ragtime back. So this was around 1967. I was also working up at Tulane part-time in the Jazz Archive. And I found out that they had lots of ragtime music up there, much more than what Bill Russell had. because I was working in the sheet music department. And so I decided, well, we're going to let's try to play some of these songs just for fun, to see what they sound like. So we started having sessions here at Preservation Hall, actually, first. Got some guys together. We had Cy Frazier on drums, and Paul Crawford played trombone, Bill Russell on the violin, Orange Killen on the clarinet, and first we had Andrew Anderson, who played in the Olympia Brass Band. He played trumpet with us. And I forgot who played bass in the beginning. And so, Jaffe also played tuba in the beginning when we first started out. And I had to transpose all the bass parts to tuba because there's no tuba parts in the orchestrations. So we started playing here, and then somebody came to town who had another record company called Pearl Records. He was a friend of Leonard Brackett. He decided he wanted to record us. So we did a recording at the home of Paul Crawford's house. In fact, I have that record here. I can show you. And
you want to find it right now?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
It's the one that has sheet music on the front cover.
Okay. Let's see.
Nice too, if you want to let him find it, that will look kind of cool.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll find it for you quickly. Oh, it's not here. Maybe I didn't bring it. Is there another one there?
Mm-mm.
Oh, here it is.
All right. So if you want to hold it and start telling us about it.
Yeah, so these are the parts that we used when we played. When we first started playing, I used the stock arrangements, which are actually for a 15-piece orchestra, but a lot of the parts are doubled. You know, the flute plays the same thing as the violin, and some of the other parts are doubled by other instruments. You had to kind of go through them and see if there was some parts in let's say, the cello part that was not in the other parts. Then I would rewrite that and put that on the trombone so that you didn't miss anything. And this is actually how I learned to arrange, from looking at these.
You taught yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I take all the parts, I put them on the floor on a big table, and I look and compare it with the piano part and see what goes where, what instrument is playing what part. So I learned how to do. Then I could write my own arrangements of ragtime pieces that I could not find orchestrations for. And many years later, I was reading a book about Dizzy Gillespie's book, and I found out that's how he learned to arrange in the big band. He put them all on the floor and looked at all the parts and see how it worked. So he taught himself to arrange from that. Really interesting. But so anyway, that's how we started out. This is our first record. I think it's in, doesn't have a recording date. And it doesn't even have the musicians listed. And that's the reason for that, is that some of us were not in the union. And so we couldn't put our names on it. But anyway, in spite of having not any names on it, he still got some good reviews in various magazines. And at that time, we had not played any jobs. We only did a recording. We rehearsed and did a recording.
So what was your first performance?
One of our first performances were for the New Orleans Jazz Club at the Royal Orleans Hotel. I even have a photo from that. And by that time, James Freebus had joined the band on the bass, who later I played with here at Preservation Hall. And we had changed trumpet and drummer, because this Saya got very involved with the touring with the Preservation Hall band with Billy D.D. Pierce, so he was not available. Which was a shame, because he was a great reader of drum parts. He was really marvelous on that. So he was only on our first record. And a trumpet player, Andrew Anderson, got sick and couldn't play anymore. So I had to look for other members of the band. And I had help from Dick Allen at the Tulane Archives, who remembered Lionel Furbos from the dance halls. And he knew that Lionel Furbos also played in the big band and Herb Leary's big band. It was a black society orchestra, played Mardi Gras balls and things like that. And so I got introduced to Lionel Forbes, and he joined the band. And he stayed with the band until he retired. It was maybe about 30 years, a very long time. And from him, he introduced me to John Robichaud, the drummer. And so he joined the band. So that became the permanent band for a long time. Eventually, Walter Payton joined the band. That's when we started touring, actually. We started playing some gigs around New Orleans, and we played afternoon concert at Preservation Hall quite often. And George Wein came to town and heard us play. This is just when we had the first jazz festival. I think it was 69 or
70,
70.
Yeah.
It was at Louis Armstrong Park, in Congress Square, as it was called then. And George Wein came in and heard us rehearse, and he was really impressed by the band, because he's never heard a band play ragtime, because nobody was playing ragtime at that time. So he said, he got us a job to play at the festival here, and then he got us a job to play at the Newport Festival. I think that was 1971. We all went up there with a bunch of other bands from New Orleans. I think Billy Didi Pierce's band came. So Cy then played with both the bands. And Captain John Handy came up there, and the Eureka Brass Band. So we had a whole New Orleans evening up there. And we got a lot of great reviews from that, from the New York Times and various papers. So then we started doing tours, through Preservation Hall, actually. They were booking us to doing tours. So we used to do this community concerts, things like that. So the band got a lot more active. And then we've been playing at the Jazz Festival probably longer than any other band, because we're still doing it now.
What was the first Jazz Fest like?
It was very, very small. We played in the auditorium, but most of the other stuff was outside. But they had a very interesting performers there. I mean, they had people like Professor Longhair, Snook Seelin, all kinds of people that, you haven't heard that much because you didn't really see them in any of the clubs very much. It was very, very interesting festival. I think Duke Ellington came down. It was either the first, there were several years, I think, at the Congress Square. I remember Duke Ellington coming, Mahalia Jackson coming. Mahalia Jackson was also at the Newport when we played there, and so was Louis Armstrong, so we got to meet Louis Armstrong too, who was not performing at the time because he'd just been ill, and he was just singing. He wasn't playing his trumpet. But he was there, and there's a film of it, and he's dancing around with the Eureka Brass Band and all that. And he actually also talked about the ragtime orchestra, and he said that it reminded him of the John Robichaud orchestra that he heard as a child.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Why was it important to you to bring that repertoire back?
Well, I was kind of fascinated by ragtime. I knew about piano ragtime, and I never really was into playing solo piano myself. But I liked the idea of orchestra ragtime. I thought it was very interesting music. So in the beginning, we only played ragtime. But after we started playing jobs, we realized that we need to expand our repertoire a bit, because you can't just play ragtime the whole job. You can do it at the concert, but not the whole evening. So we started adding other songs to our repertoire. We play some marches, and we play some popular songs of the day. And even some waltzes and some other things. We added other songs. And eventually we also added vocals. When we found out that Lionel Forbes could sing really well, and as Robichaud as well. John Robichaud was a very good singer too. So we would add vocals as well, which made the band more entertaining, Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then the Ragtime Orchestra actually went to Europe on the tour also. That's going forward a bit. That's in 1975.
Sure. What was it like going back to Sweden with a touring band from here?
Yeah, the first time I went back to Sweden was in 1972. I'd been here 7 years. And that was with the New Orleans Joy Makers, a group that Orange and I put together. of New Orleans veteran musicians, basically guys that played around here. It was Percy Humphrey, Lou Nelson, Orange, me, Father Al Lewis on banjo, and Chester Sardis on bass, and Louis Barber on drums. That was the first tour we did. And it was supposed to be Manuel Sales on banjo, but he backed out, and we had just met Father Al. He was not active around town. I had met him at the party, one of Kid Chic's parties in the Tremere. And he was there, and got introduced to him as he was a banjo player and guitar player. And then later on, I was involved in doing, because I was working for Tulane Jazz Archives, I got involved in interviewing him for the archive. So we went to his house to interview him, and it kind of turned into a party, because he was a real party guy. We sent somebody out to get some whiskey, and it turned into a big party, and he started playing and entertaining, and it was a lot of fun. So it gave me an idea to get this guy back playing again. People need to hear him. So we started having jam sessions with him here at the Preservation Hall. And this was around the same time when we got this offer to go to Europe. So when Manuel Sales backed out, I said, well, we'll take Father Al. We'll take a chance on Father Al, because we really didn't know him that well at that time. And it turned out that he was the most popular one in the whole band when we went to Europe, because he was a great entertainer. He was a great singer and a real fun person. So that was our first tour, 1972, and we were like a whole month in Europe. We all the way from Scandinavia all the way down to Italy. It was a great success. Mm-hmm. So then we went back 2 more times with almost the same band. We changed a couple of guys. I think we had Kid Thomas, and we had, the first year we had Louis Nelson on trombone. But then the next year we had a guy that just moved to New Orleans, Preston Jackson, who later played here. He was from New Orleans, but he lived in Chicago most of his life, played in Louis Armstrong's big band and so on. So he moved back here, so we took him on with us for the next 2 tours. And the rest of the band was pretty much the same. That was a great success. So we did 72, 73, 74. And then I think it was either 74 or 75, we also did a tour with the Ragtime Orchestra of Europe. And we did some more recordings in Europe as well for Sonnet Records in Sweden. We recorded in London. And we did several more tours with the Ragtime Orchestra too. So all that was going on in the 70s. We did a lot of tours in Europe and in the States. And also I was playing on Bourbon Street then in the 70s. I started playing on Bourbon Street in 1970 at the Miss on Bourbon on the corner here. It was a 6-hour job. It was a very hard job. From 12 to 6 in the afternoon, and it only a 4-piece band. It was really hard work, but we were young,
A very long time.
Yeah, I played that first with Orange Cowan. George Finola was passed away just then. Lester Alexis played drums, who was also passed away. So I played there for about a year. And then I started playing at all the other places on Bourbon Street, like the Paddock Lounge. I played there with Thomas Jefferson and Wallace Davenport. And Ernie Ellie, he just come back from playing with Ray Charles. He joined the band. So I spent almost 10 years on Bourbon Street, apart from doing the tours in the summer usually to Europe. So that was a very busy time. And that's around the time when we also did the Pretty Baby movie.
I was just going to ask,
Yeah.
that was 78 or 79. That was a major soundtrack. How did that
Yeah,
come about?
it was Louis Malle's first movie in America. And we got the job to do that one through Jerry Wexler. He's passed away now, but he used to work for Atlantic Records. And I don't know how he found out about me, about the Ragtime Orchestra, some kind of way he found out. But Louis Malle wanted period music from the turn of the century. So we were the only band playing that kind of music in New Orleans. So we got the job to do the film with, what was the lady's name in it?
Brooke Shields?
Brooke Shields, yeah. The movie was actually banned in some countries. Yeah, that was an odd one. Yeah, and it was filmed uptown at a hotel on St. Charles. What's the name of that hotel? Can't remember. Anyway.
Was it at the Columns?
Columns.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Columns. It was filmed at the Columns and some other places. And we pretty much played songs out of our repertoire, except for if there was a couple of songs that he wanted that I had to arrange. But otherwise, it was pretty much our repertoire already, so we didn't have to learn much new. And we recorded the soundtrack at C-Sand Studios, Alan Toussaint's studio. And then we were also in the movie in a couple of little scenes, which was really funny because we had to wear blackface, because we wanted it to be an all black band. And the best part about that was Lionel Forbes, who is a Creole, They put blackface on him too. And he said, "I'm already black. Why are you doing this to me?" That was really funny. Have you ever seen that movie?
I have.
We're seeing you probably don't even remember seeing us. It's so quick. It's in the auction scene when they're auctioning off Brooke Shields.
I'm going to go back and watch it.
Yeah. You just very briefly see us in there. And that was very funny. But it was a nice movie actually. I thought it was a pretty good movie.
It's well done. The cinematography was beautiful.
Yeah, I thought it was very nice. And I was involved in some of the other music in the movie too, because Jerry Wexler was always running in and out of town. He didn't have time to do his job, sort of. So he landed it on me. So I ended up being in charge of some of the other bands that recorded, or they had Kid Thomas band in it, or rather a put-together band around Kid Thomas. So I became the supervisor for that and a few other things too. So, but Jerry Wexler got the credit, of course.
So how did One More Time come about?
That came about, that was in the late 70s also. I think around 78 maybe. That came about from, it has a little bit to do with the Ragtime Orchestra, because the guy that wrote the play, Brunel Barnieris, he used to work here at the Vauclissant restaurant. It was right behind here. It's run by a Creole guy. And he used to come by here and hear us play. And he really liked Lionel Forbes. He was a Creole guy too. He really liked Lionel Forbes singing. And so he got an idea to do a musical. I think he got some of his ideas from his grandmother, who may have been involved in the Lyric Theater or something like that. I'm not sure. You'll have to ask him, really. But he came up with the idea of doing a musical about vaudeville in New Orleans in the 1920s. And he got in. He was a friend of me and Orange, and so he didn't know anything about music, so he had to get us to put the music with it. He knew some of the performers that he hired. He knew Thais Clarke and Topsy Chapman. They were in a gospel group. He had met them somehow. We didn't know them. But so we started listening to old records, really, and trying to pick out songs. Some of the songs were already in the repertoire of the Ragtime Orchestra, like Kiss Me Sweet was an Armand Piron song that was used in the show. And then we started just having rehearsals in my apartment over here on Orleans Street, one of them, and also in Vanel's apartment. And I started writing the music for it, basically. And some of it we copied from old records, but we had to change all the keys before the singers. And also, we used a smaller band. We used only a 5-piece band. We dropped the violin, and we dropped the string bass and used the tuba. But Walter Payton also played tuba. So he moved on to the tuba, and we had no trombone. And that became the band, so we had to rearrange the music a little bit for that. By that time, I had learned how to arrange music. So we started writing all the parts out, and we started doing the show around town. Yeah, we did it at Xavier University and a few other places. And eventually at the Toulouse Theater, which is over on Toulouse Street, which is called something else now, One Eye Jack. Yeah. And they used to show movies there in the old days. So we started doing performances over there. And that was a great success. And it was very impressive. The girls, there were some great singers in it. They did great dancers. And they put on a hell of a show. I mean, it was very impressive. And then Vanell, he somehow got somebody in New York interested in the show. They came down to see it. I believe Jerry Wexler was one of them. He became an investor in the show. It's interesting because I had a bit of a falling out with Jerry Wexler because...
What happened?
Well, what happened when we were doing the Pretty Baby, I had copyrighted my arrangements, you know, and on advice of a lawyer here in town that worked for the Jazz Festival. And you can copyright arrangement of songs that are in public domain. So I copyrighted the ones that were in public domain. So I realized on advice of my lawyer, he said that you need to sign a contract with the film company to protect yourself. So, but Jerry Wexler had left town, you know. So I had my lawyer do this contract up and took it to the other guy that was working here in Jerry's place, and he signed the contracts. You know? And then when Jerry found out about it, he became furious about this because he thought that this was going to be a work for hire. In other words, he wouldn't have to pay me anything, and he probably would have copyrighted it himself. That's what I suspected. So he was very angry about this, but there was nothing he could do about it because the contract was signed. I'm still getting royalties, by the way. So anyway, so he was very peed off about that. So then I ended up working with him again in one more time, many years later. But anyways, he became one of the producers, and we went up to New York. The whole company went, except Lionel Phobos. He didn't want to leave because he still had a day job. He has his own sheet metal company that he was running. He didn't mind doing a few tours in Europe, but he didn't want to go for a long-term job. And by this time, we had another trumpet player had moved down to New Orleans, Jabbar Smith, who was a very famous trumpet player from the 1920s. He was down here, and we were trying to find a role for him in the show. I think he became like the janitor in the show or something like that. But then, of course, we needed a trumpet, so we got him instead to go with us to New York. And the rest of the band went. Walter Payton, Robichaud went. Robichaud said, I'll go for a month for the previews. We needed something strong. The New York producers didn't want the band, actually. They said, we just get a New York band. But Vanell, to his credit, said, no, you do take the whole show or nothing. So he took the whole show. They took the whole show. And we went to New York, and we started at the Village Gate. And it was a great success immediately. And he stayed there for a number of years. And eventually we had to replace some of the musicians because they went back to New Orleans. Walter Payton went back, and Robichaud went back. The rest of us stayed. We moved to New York. And I stayed there for 5 years. And the girls in the show, everybody stayed there, really. And we also started doing tours then. First we did like 1 year at the Gate with the original cast. And then we started putting touring companies together with other performers. We were using New York performers then. We put together several companies to tour. The original company went to England, went to London, and we performed there for as long as the union there allow us to stay. We had to also replace people after a while with local performers. But that worked out really well. Clark Peters was one of the guys. He took, remember him from the Tremere? He took the part of Vanell in England. And it went really well in England, and the same company went to Australia. I went to Australia too. I went with all the companies to train them. Whenever we had new people, I would go for 2 weeks and train. My job was to train the singers, basically. I had to do that. Topsy Chapman has basically wrote the voice arrangements, but she didn't know how to write music, so I had to write everything out. And then I ended up training all the singers, and Orange ended up training all the bands.
You went to Juilliard for 2 years while you were living in New York.
Yeah, that was towards the end of One More Time.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I decided that while I'm up here, I might as well go and educate myself a little bit about music since I never had any musical training. So I went into the extension division. And
of Juilliard.
Yeah, and I started out with music theory and counterpoint, orchestration, a whole bunch of different things. And I was actually getting in, by the time I left, I was getting into composition. But then I moved back here. That was the end of my training.
I asked you before if that changed your role, your perspective on music at all. It helps you with your arrangement.
Yeah, it makes it a lot quicker to write arrangement, and you don't have to rely on an instrument. You can. I also studied with a jazz player when I was in New York. I studied with a saxophone player. Can't think of his name right now, but he played in One More Time also. He was the arranger for Cab Calloway. I cannot think of his name. Anyway, it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, I wanted to learn about big band arranging, which is totally different from classical arranging, and write for 5 saxophones or 4 trumpets, whatever. So I studied with him, big band arranging. That was very interesting. Of course, I never had any use for it after I moved back here. I never played with any big bands. But it actually helped me for doing vocal arrangement too, learn how to write parts. And while I was in New York, I also worked with a couple other shows, shows that actually didn't make it to Broadway, but they were on their way to Broadway, hopefully. And one was called Bojangles, and we had a workshop, went on for like a month. And that was a very good learning experience because we had a big choir in there. Because before I only had to arrange for 5 singers or 4 singers. So now I had to arrange for a big choir. So that was a very good learning experience too. And then I worked with another couple of tryout shows that never really went anywhere. And then I moved back to New Orleans. I also played in some nightclubs while I was in New York too, a little bit. But I was ready to move back then by that time. By the time One More Time was finished, I moved back to New Orleans.
Well, you went from being an admirer of New Orleans music to really being an ambassador of New Orleans music to the rest of the world, going on tour, representing New Orleans music in New York. It's an interesting role to be in.
Yeah, it was very interesting, and it was a lot of fun traveling around. We did the tours in the States too. We went to Canada, and we did a European tour. We went all the way from Finland all the way down to Greece. Yeah, it was very interesting.
What about Ghb Records? Let's talk about that before we start getting into the photographs.
Oh yeah, Ghb Records. I had known George Bach, who started the company in 1949. I have known him for a very long time. I met him. He used to come to New Orleans with Leonard Brackett. They were friends. They lived not too far from each other, and they used to come down and hang out here at Preservation Hall and at Dixieland Hall also. And George used different people to produce recordings for his company, and I got involved in producing recordings for him. This is in the LP days, and I did a few sessions for him. I did one here at Preservation Hall with Annie Pavago, a gospel singer. That was Slow Drag Pavago's wife, who used to sing in a church on Burgundy Street called the Morning Star Baptist Church. She was a piano player, also play organ, and a singer. And a lot of us used to go to that church because they had a tremendous choir in there, kind of primitive choir. But it was really a great feeling. So I decided I wanted to record her. So I brought her over here with the whole choir over to Preservation Hall. And she played the piano and sang, the whole choir sang, played tambourines. And that was my first record I produced for Ghb. I had also produced records for other companies before that, some European companies. I did some rhythm and blues recordings. I did Earl King for a Swedish company. I did a couple of other blues singers, things like that. And then with George Bach, I did some of my own recordings, of course. We also recorded with the Ragtime Orchestra for George Bach, and I recorded with various other bands. But I was never really, I never worked in the office or anything like that. Just a little outside work for him.
Do you have different preferences for what instrument you play in different spaces?
Yeah, nowadays I'm playing mostly piano, but at different times in my career I had been on other instruments. Like right before I moved to New York, I was actually playing banjo on Bourbon Street in the Blue Angel Club. I was doing that full time. And at other times I played the guitar, not so much guitar, more banjo. But I also play in a string band here sometimes, which I enjoy. Yeah, I like to play different instruments, and I especially like the guitar actually. Although I don't play it very often because there aren't that many guitar jobs in the traditional jazz. But I used to play banjo regularly at Preservation Hall with the Greg Stapper's band. We used to play here, I think it was every Tuesday. That went on for many years. Because we used to have banjos more at Preservation Hall than we have now. And it used to be 7-piece bands most of the time. Keith Thomas had a 7-piece band, and Sweet Emma had a 7-piece band. All the bands seemed to have banjos in those days. Mm-hmm. So I played quite a lot of banjo.
Instrumentation preferences change over
time.
Yeah,
they change. Sometimes instead of using banjos, they have more horns, you know. That has changed. Banjos are not, well, banjos are still used quite a bit around New Orleans. We don't use banjos. Well, I play at the Palm Court restaurant twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays, but we don't use banjos there either. I guess it's an economical thing too, not to have so many musicians to pay as well. I do play banjos sometimes in trios at restaurants sometimes. I haven't been doing that too much recently because I got my day job now too.
At Ghb.
Yeah, so I don't really want to play too many night jobs because I got to work in the daytime too.
Do you want to demonstrate? We were talking about preferences for playing the piano like a banjo and a few other things. Do you want to show us a little bit?
Oh, something on the piano?
Yeah. Let me get these from you. So what are you gonna show us?
Huh?
What are you gonna show us?
Well, I don't know. What would you like?
Well, I want you to show us, we were talking about preferences for playing the piano like a banjo before.
Oh, yeah.
So show me that style.
Well, when I played with George Lewis, I would play. Basically banjo style. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what he liked. Mm-hmm. Now with other bands you would play, play much looser. Mixture of chords and little fill-ins, things like that. It depends on who you're playing with. If you're playing with a singer, there could be, I play with singers too. Like every Wednesday I play with Topsy Chapman. Then you will play different, again, you will play maybe... You must sustain more notes and fill in.
Crooning style, pop style.
Yeah, fill in between the vocal lines. So different things.
We were listening to Pennies from Heaven earlier. Do you want to play a little bit of that?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to go through some of the pictures before you go?
Yeah.
You brought a bunch of them.
And this is the Legends.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like. It looks pretty much the same now. Doesn't it?
I can't
That's
imagine.
Tony Foudret, me, and Orange. This is a jam session at the Preservation Hall with Kid Thomas, Joe Watkins. We were trying to get him back to playing. He'd been very sick, and we were trying to get him back on his feet again. Sylvester Handy, John Handy's brother, was Keiko, Kid Thomas, Albert Burbank. That's me playing at Maison Bourbon.
Wow.
Yeah.
What year would that have been?
That would have been 1970. And this is also at Maison Bourbon with Dave Oxley on drums, Frank Oxley's father, and that's Tony Foudret. This is at the famous door, where I also worked in the 70s. Kid Chic,
Yeah.
and that's Louis Ford's father. Manuel Sales, Milford Dolio, drummer. That's me back in Sweden. That's a good one. Look at that suit.
Well, we didn't even talk. You were in a band early.
Yes, I
yeah.
did play in the band from 1960 till I left. When I came back from New York, they just opened the Riverwalk, and they had a band playing there, strolling around, and the banjo player decided he was going to quit, so I ended up playing there.
Yeah.
And I'm still playing there occasionally. It's not a regular job anymore, but it used to be a full-time job. We used to play there every day.
Wow.
And stroll around. And that's Greg Stafford, Evan Christopher, Fred Alonso, and that's Big Al Carson. He used to be our Santa Claus over there too. That was a lot of fun. So here's me with Doc Cheatham, famous trumpet player from New York. He was down in New Orleans. I brought him down to New Orleans, him and Sammy Price, to play at the festival. I had run into, this is funny how it happened, I ran into Quint Davis in a restaurant, and I had a lot to drink, and I was kind of loaded, and I met him in the bathroom, and we were chatting, so I said, hey, how about bringing down Doc Cheatham to New Orleans? Because I had been up in New York and played with him. I said, yeah, sure. You know.
So
That's how it happened. And he came down, we made a recording too. And then I did a tour of Europe with Doc too. And this is us playing at the bar mitzvah for one of the Jaffe kids. I don't know which one. We were playing Jewish music. We were reading parts. Bill Russell got all this stuff together. He loved doing things like that. So we got our head, that's Walter Payton, we got our funny hats on and everything. And this is at Walkerson's restaurant around the corner from here. That's Tommy Sancton, Yuichi Kimura, who was studying in America at the time. That's me on the guitar. Clive Wilson, some guy from Australia. Here's the brass band again. That's Young Tuxedo Brass Band again. Reginald Cola is that guy. He used to play at the hall too. And here's the Ragtime Orchestra playing at Preservation Hall. We had two violins for some reason, I don't know why. That's Bill and another guy on the violin.
This would have been, what, 75-ish or something?
This would have been in the 70s, yeah. And that's Walter, Robbie Shaw, Paul Crawford, Lionel Phobos. We used to do Sunday afternoon concert. That's the same band, pretty much. That's a promotion picture. There's another one. This is one we used when we were touring with Preservation Hall. It was a promotion picture. That's me somewhere, young kid. Here's the first Joy Makers we went to Europe with. And this was taken in Europe, this picture. Percy, Orange, just so look how short he was. Louis Bobrin, me, Father Al, Louis Nelson. That's just some promo pictures. Me on the banjo, me on the guitar. But here's the two trumpet guys, Lionel Phobos, Doc Cheatham and me outside the Palm Court. as me playing the guitar. That's the guitar I bought in the pawn shop,
Yeah.
Eagle Loan Office on Rampart Street. This only cost me $100. It's a great guitar. It was kind of wrecked in Katrina, but I managed to get it fixed. And that's Tony and Orange and me playing.
Did you lose any other instruments at Katrina?
Yeah, I lost my banjos, my piano, my Steinway piano.
Wow.
That was a huge loss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fortunately, I had the instruments insured, except the piano wasn't insured, but the other ones were insured, so I was able to have them fixed, the ones that could be fixed, and the other ones I just bought new ones.
Yeah.
New old ones.
New old ones.
Yeah. That's Bill Russell, me, on my tenor guitar. That was from my father, I played that. That's Richard Payne, who also used to play around here. And that's one of my tours in Europe. And I used to do tours with these two ladies from the One More Time show, Topsy Chapman and Thais Clark. Richard Payne, English guy on the clarinet, Johnny Letman from New York, and Ernie Ellie. We did a lot of tours with this group. This is a more recent tour, a couple of years ago. Duke Hiker, what's his name? Harris, Robert Harris. Sam Remington, Juanita Brooks, who since passed away. She was a great singer, one of the best. Topsy, me, Richard Payne, not Richard Payne, Bill Huntington, who started very early playing with jazz bands here in the 1950s. He was like the first white guy to go and play with all black guys. Yeah, he was a great man. He's left New Orleans. Shannon Powell. It's me playing the banjo on Bourbon Street, some club on Bourbon Street. Well, here's one of those typical jam session events. This is up on Decatur Street, the Bonaparte's Retreat. Kid Chic. That's Morgan, Andrew Morgan. That's me on the guitar. Barry Martin, Freddie John from Sweden, jamming. And this is one of the recordings I made in the 60s. This is in Hobbs Hall across the river. It was a session organized by Barry Martin. I think this was in the late 60s. Nelson, Percy, Albert Burbank, Barry, me, Chester Sardis. That's back at the Museum Bourbon. Lester Alexis, who passed away. Ernie Cagnolati also used to play here at the hall. He also toured with us in Europe. He has at the Skåne Festival in Switzerland. The same guys. There's another tour, but that's Jabbar Smith, Thais Clark, Frank Fields, I forgot his name, Frog Joseph. There's another band we toured with. And here's the One More Time show. We picture taken in one of those promotion events at the bookstore. This is an assistant director. Jabbo, Robbie Shaw, me. He was what you call it, the dancing choreographer. Topsy Vanell, who wrote the play. Comba Williams, who passed away. Thais Clark. Here's me and the girls. We toured with all three of them a couple of times. God, talking about the job that was.
Love that photo.
Yeah, that was a job. I remember the trumpet player from New York, he said to me, I don't know how much you get paid, but you deserve every penny dealing with this latest, this prima donnas. He was scared to death of them. Oh, this was tough. She was a tough one. But she was the greatest singer. Have you ever heard her?
Just in passing,
She's a fantastic singer. This is me on tour with the Preservation Hall Band. Because when I joined the band, Sing Miller had passed away, the piano player. This was right in the 80s, like 86 maybe, right after I came back from New York. He passed away, and Alan Jaffe asked me to join the band. And this was with Percy Humphrey and Willie Humphrey. Who was on the trombone? I forgot. James Pree was on the bass. Frank Parker was playing drums. He had a stroke, and then Joe Lasty came in. That was the band at that time. What's the trombone player that lives in California now? Who was with the band? Frank DeMond. He was in the band. And I was with the band for about 7 years or something like that. That's another gig on Bourbon Street with Punch Miller,
Oh, yeah.
Lester Alexis, Homer Eugene. He's passed away. His brother still lives, Wendell Eugene. He's playing the guitar again. That's Outside Legends. Here's the record. That's the first lineup. Well, not the first, but Lionel had come in, but this one, Cy was still with the band. This is by the time we made the first recordings. James Prevost, Bill, Cy. That's pretty much the same band in Jackson Square.
It's a great photo.
Well, here's another one of our tours in Europe. You can imagine what that was like. It was really wild. Frank Fields, Ernie Ellie. Look at all this black hair he had in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucian on trombone. And that was a fun tour. That's me playing at the party with him. Do you know him? Larry Batiste. He's a local drummer.
I'm not sure.
This is from a recording session with Robbie Shaw and Lionel. Here's us at Preservation Hall. Another picture from Preservation Hall. With a different clarinet player for some reason, I don't know why. That's the Sunday afternoon concert. Another jam session. I think you had another picture of that. That's the first band we toured with to Europe. And here's me at the Riverwalk with all the guys.
Every day you did that.
Yeah, we did it for a long time. And then it turned into a weekend job.
Yeah.
You know, and we did that for a long time. And now it's changed ownership 3 times while I've been working there. And now we just play that sporadically. Every now and then they call us. And we don't play so much at the Riverwalk. They send us out to other places. They send us to play for a ship coming in, or we did a lot of Christmas concerts for them, Christmas parades and things like that. So we still do a little bit. But anyway, 6 days a week, that was a bit too much anyway. I'm glad when that ended.
It's a lot.
Yeah, because you had to stroll around and play too.
Right,
You know,
right.
That gets kind of boring after a while. But anyway, it was fun. It gave me a chance to play the banjo every now and then. Yeah. And now I've since 2011 I've been running the record company.
Right.
George Buck got sick. He had Alzheimer's. He couldn't work anymore, and eventually passed away. So I ended up. His widow asked me to take over, run the company. So that's what I've been doing now. Yeah. Which is it's a little more difficult now because CD sales have really dropped,
Right.
especially in the last couple of years. So,
And with traditional jazz, how do you deal with that?
well,
I mean-
we do other music too, but we do a lot of traditional jazz. We have about 1,400 CDs altogether, but we have, I would say, maybe like 3/4 of it or 2/3 of it is traditional jazz, and then we have big bands. We have a lot of singers, mostly New York singers, cabaret type of singers, and we have what else do we have?
A wide
Some
range.
country music, but not much.
A wide range, but it's still so difficult when so few people are buying CDs anymore.
Yeah, it is difficult. We are going into the downloading business now. I started that. I was trying to talk George into that, and he was a very conservative guy, and he was also blind. So he didn't quite understand. He didn't know anything about computers. He never learned to use one. So he wasn't very enthusiastic about it. And this is, before I started working there full time, I tried to talk him into it. But eventually he said, okay, you go ahead and set it up. So we got in kind of late. We'd only been into it for about 2 years. And now it turns out that downloading is kind of slipping too now because of the streaming.
Streaming, right?
Streaming, of course we make money off streaming too, but we don't make as much.
Always have to stay one step ahead of the game.
Yeah, no, and I'm not very technical, I never had a day job before, I never worked with computers, I had to learn a lot of those things. But we're making some money off the download, so that's okay. And also we have an endowment from George. George had quite a lot of money in radio stations, and he gave us an endowment in his will. So we haven't had to use yet because we've been doing
That's good.
fine financially. We don't have a problem right now, but we may need it in the future.
Right.
Especially if we're going to go into some other projects, which I am planning to do. We are planning to do some books. We have done books in the past, but I like to do books and also e-books because we have
That's
a lot
smart.
of material. Yeah, we have a lot of photos. We have a lot of recordings that we haven't even released. And we have a lot of
I mean,
videos.
even these, there's so many that, the Punch Miller one, there's so many rare photos in here.
Yeah.
I mean, even personally and professionally, that's something that you could get
Well,
into.
we have lots of photos going way back from the 50s, 40s, and even earlier in collections that we bought up. And we also have access to the historic collection and Tulane archive and the Jazz Museum, which should often give us photos. So we are thinking about putting all this together in a product that would have music, photos, and videos. Maybe like an ebook.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah, so I'm going to start working on that now.
Something that could be accessed online as well
Yeah.
as tangibly,
Yeah.
would be the best.
Yeah, so that's a future thing. George never meant for his company to make money. It was always a hobby for him, you know. And he used to fund it from his radio stations. Well, we don't get that funding anymore now because it's gone into a trust. But we still have enough money that we can do things. So that's going to be my future job. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. And we're still putting out CDs. We just put out about 8 CDs recently. But we're not putting out as much traditional jazz. We've been putting out a lot of mainstream jazz. Because we have, in our tape rooms, we have lots of sessions that have not been issued or have been on LPs years ago. So we are putting a lot of that stuff out. And that stuff actually sells better than the traditional jazz. And also
I
some
can
of our
imagine.
singers sell well too, because some of them do a lot of touring. So then we sell a lot. Yeah. So I just have to try different angles, you know.
Well, thank you so much for bringing everything in, for
Yeah.
talking, for playing.
Great.
Talk about, as we conclude, talk about the future of traditional jazz.
Yeah, that's a difficult question because we don't know what's going to happen with the jazz. There's been a lot of different trends recently, I think, because when I came here, it was all these old guys playing here in their style, which was a real New Orleans style that you didn't hear anywhere else in the world, unless you heard a band that was trying to imitate them or whatever, like some of the Japanese bands and even some European bands that would sort of try to imitate the band. But with all those guys gone, the music was bound to change because younger musicians, I'm speaking now of New Orleans musicians, younger musicians coming in, they are influenced by a lot of other types of music that these old guys never heard. They listen to James Brown or whatever, So that, and they also listen to modern jazz. So all that's going to blend in together. So you're going to obviously change the music somewhat. There are some people that try to keep the music really old-fashioned. Greg Stafford is one of those, for example, or Michael White. Those are two of the few guys that are really aiming to that. Some of the other younger musicians, they are more showing an influence of more modern music, for better or worse, whatever. It depends. It's all depending on your taste, what you like. And the other changes I noticed recently since Katrina is the new scene in New Orleans on Frenchman Street, which consists basically of American musicians, not from New Orleans, from other parts of the States. I don't know exactly where, New York or whatever, wherever they're coming from. And they are aiming for a totally different music, which has really not that much relation with New Orleans music. Not the music that I heard when I came here, which people tend to call revival jazz, whatever that's supposed to mean. They are going back to the old records instead and playing a lot of the stuff from the 1920s. And that we never heard in New Orleans before. I never heard that in New Orleans. I never heard any bands play that. Because you got to remember, when I first came to New Orleans, there wasn't really any young musicians playing this music. There was only the old guys. Eventually I met up with Walter Payton. He was one of the first of the younger guys that we see play around here, and eventually Freddie Alonso. They basically started out in brass bands, but there weren't any young ones, and there certainly weren't any white ones playing. There was none, that was the biggest surprise to me when I came here, was that there weren't any white musicians interested in playing this music. The only exception was Tommy Sancton. It's the only one I met in the whole city. That was really amazing to me. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anybody interesting. There were some old white musicians, but that play sort of a different style. But Tommy, he was totally influenced by the black musicians here. But he was the only one. But now we have these guys playing around town, and you see them on the street and everywhere, and they're playing a variety of music, not just jazz even. There's lots of other music too. Walking over here today, I heard somebody playing from Cajun fiddle up here on the corner. Actually, it was really good. Which we never had in New Orleans before. We didn't really have Cajun music even in New Orleans in the old days. But so anyway, so that's one new scene, the Frenchman Street scene, which is separate from the guys that play around Preservation Hall. They tend not to play down there. I don't play down there either. Occasionally, I play at Snug Harbor occasionally, but very rarely. Yeah, a lot of those bands are also, playing for tips too, which I don't particularly want to do. Mm-hmm. I'd rather play for a salary.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know what is gonna is this music that you are now playing down around Frenchman Street and some other locations. Is that music going to blend in with the other guys playing here? I don't know. Right now, it doesn't seem to be blending together. Mm-hmm. It's like the guys who play here, they don't play down there, and the guys on Frenchman Street don't play here. So it's like two separate scenes. Mm-hmm. I guess at some point it's going to blend together. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
New Orleans has always been a blend of things, of people moving in and out, and that changed, so time will tell.
It's interesting to see what's happening down there on Frenchman Street, because I used to live there. I lived there in the late 60s when I was playing at Lutyens. I lived on Charter Street right off Esplanade, and I remember that neighborhood really well. It was an Italian neighborhood. My next door neighbor, a lady, she couldn't even speak English. And across the street from me was a grocery store run by some other Italians. And there was no clubs or anything down there, no music clubs. And Frenchman Street had an oyster place, it had a hardware store, a couple of other things. But there was no music. I think there was one bar that used to occasionally have a little music, but there was nothing. So it totally changed now.
Mm-hmm. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens to that.
Well, thank you so much for bringing in recordings and photography and playing for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.